Hello and welcome to Indus News, live from Islamabad. I am Munib Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the top stories first. In Gaza, the death toll from relentless Israeli airstrikes has risen to 190, including 55 children, following the killing of 42 Palestinians in early morning attacks. Over 1,200 people have been wounded since Monday as Israeli warplanes destroyed 3 more buildings and targeted the home of Hamas's Gaza chief. Meanwhile, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has told the Security Council that hostilities are utterly appalling and called for an immediate end to the fighting. He said the UN is engaging all sides towards an immediate ceasefire and called on them to allow mediation efforts to intensify and succeed. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation has strongly condemned Israel's brutal aggression against the Palestinian people. The organization adopted a joint resolution calling for an immediate halt of the attacks on civilians. It rejected Israel's expansionist policy, saying such actions are a violation of international law and the UN resolutions. At least 4 people have died after torrential rains and winds battered Karnataka state as virus hit India braces for a powerful cyclone, Tauktae. Authorities are evacuating thousands of people from low-lying areas along the western coast. The cyclone is expected to make landfall in Gujarat as early as Monday night. Meanwhile, India has reported more than 4,000 COVID-19 deaths and over 311,000 infections in the past 24 hours. In Pakistan, 76 more people lost their lives to the virus and over 2,300 tested positive overnight. The global number of coronavirus infections has topped 162 million, with more than 3.36 million deaths. And in the mixed martial arts, Charles Oliveira beat 3-time champion Michael Chandler to claim the undisputed lightweight title in Houston. He has now extended his winning streak to 9. Well, these were the top stories. News in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. We'll start from Gaza, where the death toll from relentless Israeli airstrikes has risen to 190, including 55 children, following the killing of 42 Palestinians in early morning attacks. Over 1,200 people have been wounded since Monday as Israeli warplanes destroyed 3 more buildings and targeted the home of Hamas's Gaza chief. 13 other Palestinians have been killed by Israeli forces in the occupied West Bank. Meanwhile, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has told the Security Council that hostilities are utterly appalling and called for an immediate end to fighting. He said the UN is engaging all sides towards an immediate ceasefire and called on them to allow mediation efforts to intensify and succeed. The Israeli attacks on Gaza come after weeks of mounting tensions over the looming forced expulsion of Palestinians from their homes in the occupied East Jerusalem. The situation escalated when Israeli police stormed Al-Aqsa Mosque and wounded hundreds of Palestinians during several days of violence. Now, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation has strongly condemned Israel's brutal aggression against the Palestinian people. A resolution adopted at an emergency meeting also called for an immediate halt of the attacks on civilians. It rejected Israel's expansionist policy, saying such actions are a violation of the international law and UN resolutions. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation opened an emergency meeting as Israeli aggression in occupied Palestinian territories enters its 7th day. In his virtual address, Pakistan's foreign minister said Israel is violating international human rights laws by using unjustified force against defenseless Palestinians. He said Israel's crimes against humanity should not escape accountability. Saudi Foreign Minister Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud also called on the international community to act urgently to put an end to military operations. For his part, Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu called for an international protection mechanism for Palestinian civilians, while Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif accused Israel of committing a genocide and crimes against humanity. Palestinian Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki criticized countries that normalized relations with Israel last year during his address to the meeting. He said normalization of relations without achieving peace is tantamount to supporting the apartheid regime and participation in its crimes. Now, protests in solidarity with Palestine are being held in different parts of the world, including in Spain, Canada, US, Pakistan and Mexico as well. Now, in Mexico, hundreds gathered at the monument to the revolution demonstrating against the flare-up of Israeli violence in Gaza. Thousands of Canadians marched in downtown Toronto, waving Palestinian flags and chanting slogans in support of the Palestinian people. Similarly, scores of people took to the streets in the US state of Dallas, carrying signs in a show of support for Palestinians. In Spain, thousands gathered on Madrid Central Square to demonstrate against the ongoing atrocities in Gaza. Large protests are also planned in Pakistan cities of Multan and Lahore on Monday. Earlier, police in Berlin, Paris and Athens used tear gas to disperse the peaceful protesters rallying against Israeli aggression on the innocent Palestinians. Now, intense fighting between the Taliban and Afghan government forces has resumed in southern Helmand province as a three-day Eid ceasefire comes to an end. The head of the Helmand Council accused the Taliban of attacking security checkpoints on the outskirts of Lashkar Gah and other districts. He said the fighting started early today and is still ongoing. However, a Taliban spokesperson refuted the military's allegation, saying the Afghan forces started the offensive. Helmand has seen intense fighting since the US began its troops withdrawal from Afghanistan earlier this month. Meanwhile, ISIS has claimed responsibility for the Friday attack on a Kabul mosque, which took 12 lives. Now moving to Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, where police have arrested two sons of the martyred Hurriyat leader Muhammad Ashraf Sehrai. Police detained Mujahid Sehrai and Rashid Sehrai in Srinagar and took them to Kupwara. This comes a day after Indian forces arrested 21 people for holding protests against Israel's military offensive in Gaza. The occupying forces blamed the Kashmiris for attempting to leverage the situation in Palestine to disturb public peace. Reportedly, a case has been registered against them for raising pro-freedom slogans. Meanwhile, Indian forces have launched a violent operation in the outskirts of Jammu city. Moving on now, at least 4 people have died after torrential rain and winds battered Karnataka state as virus hit India braces for a powerful cyclone Tauktae. Officials said the rainfall is accompanied by gale wind speed reaching 70 to 80 kilometers per hour. Authorities are evacuating thousands of people from low-lying areas along the western coast. The state government said nearly 300 are currently housed in relief camps. The cyclone is expected to make landfall in Gujarat as early as Monday night. Still in India now, where a number of farmers have been injured after police bait and charged them for protesting at an event attended by Haryana's chief minister. Farmer leaders say the police fired plastic bullets, tear gas shells and arrested several protesters. Now, since November, farmers have been protesting against 3 new agricultural laws which they say will destroy their livelihoods. The Modi-led government claims the new laws will modernize India's agriculture. Multiple rounds of talks between farmers and the centre failed to break the deadlock. India has reported more than 4,000 COVID-19 deaths and over 311,000 infections in the past 24 hours, while the global number of cases has topped 162 million with more than 3.36 million deaths. More about the pandemic in this report.
With the troubling variant, drug shortages and disrupted vaccine drives, India continues to struggle with the dire coronavirus crisis. Member of India's upper house, Congress leader Rajiv Sattav has died of COVID-19 complications at the age of 46. Meanwhile, family members of patients staged a protest in Chennai city to obtain remdesivir drug that is used for the treatment of COVID-19. India's government official confirmed that bodies of coronavirus victims were found dumped in rivers. It reflected an alarming practice that officials believed may stem from poverty and fear of the disease in villages.
People are so scared that they're not even coming here to take bath. After reading and watching the news that over 40-50 bodies were found, out of which some were suspected to be coronavirus positive, despite their faith in the Ganges.
In the U.S., Center of Disease and Prevention Control said schools should continue to use masks and follow social distancing rule for this academic year, as all students will not be fully vaccinated. Down in the south, Argentina has crossed 70,000 deaths in the midst of a second outbreak that is worsened by a slow vaccination process. Medics say in the capital city of Buenos Aires, the mortality rate in intensive care is as high as 67%. Meanwhile, as Brazil registered more than 2,000 deaths and over 67,000 cases in a day, President Jair Bolsonaro yet again said Brazilians do not have to stay at home.
To the health professionals, we regret the deaths from COVID and the other deaths in Brazil, but we must face the problem. It is not by staying under the bed covers and at home that we are going to solve this problem. We have to face COVID-19. Life goes on. We are already talking about the third wave. If the third wave comes, we will also have the fourth, fifth, sixth infinite waves. Of course, we hope against it, but we must face it.
Europe seems to be seeing slightly positive developments. Tourist-filled airports, seaports and highways in Greece as the country officially opened its door to international visitors. Beaches in Italy also appear to be a bit crowded as the new rules come into force, scrapping quarantine requirements for visitors from the EU, the UK, among others.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, COVID-19 has claimed 76 more lives over the past 24 hours. The Health Ministry says the nationwide fatalities toll has crossed 19,500. The ministry said nearly 2,400 tested positive for the virus overnight. It said the caseload has exceeded 877,000, while nearly 789,000 patients have recovered. The number of active cases stands at 68,819. The ministry said over 4,300 patients are in critical condition. Now, Myanmar's military has entered a small town in western Chin state which took up arms against them 3 weeks ago. Activists from the volunteer Chinland Defence Force say they have retreated from Mindat to spare the town further bombardment. The anti-junta armed group says 6 of its fighters were killed during an attack on the military. The military government had already declared martial law in the town and described those defying its authority as terrorists. Mindat is one of the several towns where opponents of the military have armed themselves. Earlier, the US and Britain urged the junta to avoid civilian casualties in Mindat after the National Unity Government appealed for help. Now, nearly 800 people have died in daily protests at February's coup, which ousted the elected government. Moving on, North Korea has criticized South Korea's ongoing biennial military training and its recent joint exercise with the United States. Pyongyang's media warned that Seoul will only stab itself in the eyes by confronting North Korea. It said Seoul's military build-up and drills are strictly based on its plan for a preemptive strike. Pyongyang said the moves further aggravate the already critical tension of the Korean peninsula. Earlier this month, South Korea and the United States also held a joint cargo loading and unloading drill at Daegu Air Base. More news coming up in this news bulletin after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now, in Indonesia, 7 people have drowned after an overloaded boat capsized in the reservoir on Java Island. Police said the accident took place when all 20 passengers suddenly moved to one side of the vessel to take a group photo. The added 11 people were rescued and the search for 2 missing people was ongoing. Authorities said they will look into whether there was negligence by those managing the boat rides at the reservoir. Now in Colombia, anti-government protests have been ongoing for more than 2 weeks. The protests, which started over tax reforms, have steadily grown into intensified and have incorporated demands for wide-ranging reforms. What started as a groundswell over a proposed tax hike by the Colombian government has now grown into a full-blown rights movement. Since demonstrations erupted in April, over 40 people have so far been killed, while many allege sexual abuse during clashes with the police. Demonstrators now demand an end to police brutality, the healthcare crisis, and increasing poverty. But the situation has aggravated exponentially ever since a teen committed suicide after accusing the police of sexual abuse and arbitrary abduction. The country's prosecutor general says she has formed a special team to investigate the events.
In response to information circulating on social media about the alleged sexual aggression to a minor within the facilities of the Immediate Reaction Unit of Papillon and her late death, the Attorney General Office of the nation formed a special team with 2 inspectors, one of them from the city of Bogota.
But demonstrations refuse to die down despite government assurances, as many protesters doubt the government's promises to bear fruit. Matters took a violent turn after protesters set fire to the building where the teen was being held. 1 more person was killed while scores were wounded after police tried to contain the protesters.
We have a clear agenda from the streets, a police reform, for the health law to be done away with. How does the government respond? Raping our sisters, killing us, and this is a clear example of social discontent. This is no longer about political parties. People are tired of being killed, of killing us. That is why we're here today.
End to the protest also remains elusive, as the government's offer for dialogue with union and student leaders have proved fruitless. Now, Turkey says it has killed 2 more PKK militants during an anti-terror operation in northern Iraq. In a tweet, the Turkish Defense Ministry said Turkish armed drone detected the militants in the Zap region. The ministry said the area was within the scope of Ankara's Claw Yildirim operation. It said Turkey will continue operations until all terrorists are eliminated. Ankara holds PKK responsible for some 40,000 deaths in a 30-year conflict. Australians are heading to the polls on the second day of voting to decide who will write the new constitution. Citizens will select the 155 members of the Constitutional Assembly that will draft a new charter over a year. Elections will also be held for governors, mayors and the city council members. Last year, citizens overwhelmingly decided to scrap the current constitution implemented during the Augusto Pinochet dictatorship. It was a key demand of demonstrators who were protesting since October 2019. Government data shows some 14 million people are eligible to vote in the country. According to Chile's electoral service, more than 3 million people cast their ballots on Saturday. Spacex has successfully launched a Falcon 9 rocket carrying 52 Starlink microsatellites. The spacecraft is also transporting 2 satellites of other companies. The rocket was launched from the Florida State's Kennedy Space Center. SpaceX says they intend to return it back to Earth once more. The Starlink network seeks to provide internet access through a large number of small satellites with a mass of less than 500 kilograms. The first 60 Starlink satellites were taken into orbit in 2019. Welcome back now in sports stories. Let's start with mixed martial arts, where Charles Oliveira has defeated Michael Chandler via a technical knockout in round 2 to become the new UFC lightweight champion. The title was vacated after the retirement of mixed martial arts legend Khabib Nurmagomedov. In the co-main event, Beneil Dariush earned the biggest win of his career as he outpointed Tony Ferguson in a 3-round bout. In men's flyweight action, Rogerio Bontorin emerged victorious after going the distance against Matt Schnell. Kathleen Chookagian defeated Viviane Araujo by unanimous decisions in the women's flyweight category. Meanwhile, Edson Barboza knocked out Shane Burgos with a ferocious right hand in the 3rd round. Now in the English Premier League, Crystal Palace have come from behind twice to beat Aston Villa 3-2 at Selhurst Park Stadium. Christian Benteke cancelled out John McGinn's opener in the 32nd minute. 2 minutes later, Anwar El Ghazi put Villa ahead again. But second half goals from Palace were enough to secure 3 points for the home side. They are 13th on the table, while Villa remain 11th, 4 points behind Leeds United. In tennis now, Polish teenager Iga Swiatek has thrashed Czech 9th seed Karolina Pliskova 6-0 and 6-0 to win the Italian Open. The 19-year-old reigning French Open champion took just 45 minutes to dispatch Pliskova. Former world number 1 Pliskova has now lost back-to-back Rome finals after defeat by Simona Halep last year. Swiatek swept through the first set in just 20 minutes, with Pliskova winning just 4 points. Pliskova attempted a minor fight back in the second set, but Swiatek ruthlessly snuffed out any return. In motorsports, Australia's Jack Miller held his nerve in a crash-filled MotoGP race to win the French Grand Prix. Miller finished ahead of local hopes Johan Zarco and Fabio Quartararo. It was Miller's second consecutive victory following his success in the Spanish Grand Prix earlier this month. The win makes him the first Australian to seal back-to-back Premier Class wins since Casey Stoner in 2012. Quartararo reclaimed the championship lead and sits on 80 points, a point ahead of Ducati's Francesco Bagnaia. After heavy rain, a number of riders including Joan Mir, Marc Marquez and Alex Rins failed to finish the race. And now let's have a look at how the weather is doing around the world. Well, that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Take care.